back with General Jim Jones, Mike Rogers, and Nick Burns. I want to play you a quick soundbite from Susan Rice earlier in this show. And the question was, something you brought up, why didn't you go to members of Congress and tell them that this deal was in the making? Here's what she said. Is there no one in Congress you can trust with the information to call up the chairman of the intelligence committees or the chairwoman on the Senate side and say, I want you to know this is happening and we have to act now?
Well, we did do that. In fact, we had briefed Congress in the past about this potential.
In the past, but when you knew you were going.
And when the deal was done and Sergeant Bergdahl was in U.S. custody is when we began making notifications to Congress.
But the deal had already been made and the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay were already en route to a plane to go to Qatar.
No, actually, Congress began to be notified when Sergeant Bergdahl was in American hands, which was actually before the prisoners had left Guantanamo.
Congressman, she said, look, the DOD, the Pentagon, went to the Justice Department, asked them if it was okay, given the law surrounding who needs to be consulted about the release of these Gitmo prisoners, and that the Justice Department said fine.
Well, there's a reason that Congress is involved by law, by statute, by constitutional authority in these decisions prior to. The notification has to be to keep Congress currently informed, number one. And the reason is you don't want to talk to each other about something as sensitive as this. That's why Congress is involved in these issues. And it happens frequently on some very sensitive issues, everything from the Osama bin Laden raid, which was briefed to those members of us with the clearances literally months and months in advance, and followed up to the day of the raid. So some notion that this was so secret and so sensitive that that couldn't happen is just wrong. And you know what she said she notified? I'm mystified by that. They did not notify Congress appropriately, and here's why. Other places that we have let Gitmo prisoners go to these particular countries, by the way, which we paid them to take them, has been a disaster. It hasn't worked, which is one of the things that last year we brought up to them. It's not working. So if we're ever going to continue this, you need to change it. Well, they didn't like the advice and counsel they got from Congress and apparently decided they were going to go their own direction. I always think that's dangerous. Just like the secret negotiations with Iran caused huge consequences with our allies, this is going to cause huge consequences as well. And I just don't understand why you wouldn't engage with people who have done this for a long time and bring, I think, good advice and counsel could have alleviated some of the problems that they're going to get into in the next days and months ahead, including the risk to our U.S. soldiers.
I think part of the pressure here, and you may agree with me, is that the U.S. is getting out of Afghanistan. The president made a speech at West Point this week and said, our combat troops will be out. We still don't know exactly how many troops will stay in there, if any. And the feeling that perhaps the U.S. felt, A, he seems to be getting sicker, and B, our leverage is, we're losing leverage here. Would you agree with that?
We're leaving 9,000 to 10,000 troops in Afghanistan through 2016. I didn't think it was smart to say then in the West Point speech, then we're going to leave lock, stock, and barrel. Nobody after 2016. You do reduce your leverage. And we've made a lot of sacrifices, soldiers and civilians, since 2001 in Afghanistan. This new government that comes in is going to need our help. We still have to fight al-Qaeda up on the Afghan-Pakistan border. So I think we ought to leave that small force in and not signal to the Taliban and others that we're going to leave on this date, because that robs you of the leverage you need for situations just like this.
General, a quick wrap-up question on this subject, and that is, how worried are you that these 5 men now in Qatar will end up either on the battlefield or influencing the battlefield, wherever that battlefield may be?
Well, we know the previous detainees who've been released have returned to the battlefield.
Some of them?
Some of them have. And as I said earlier, I think it's very, very important for the government of Qatar to make sure that these people are kept under control and do not return to the battlefield.
Let me turn you all to the VA quickly. The other big story this week, all of you understand bureaucracies in Washington, the military bureaucracy, the diplomatic bureaucracy, the congressional bureaucracy. Do you feel in the end that the resignation of General Shinseki was a political necessity, or was it absolutely something that had to be done for policy purposes, Nick?
Well, it seems to be political. You had so many members of Congress calling for his ouster. Here's a very capable, effective, honorable general who served his country all the way back, wounded in Vietnam. And I think with what happened at the VA over the last decade or so, you had this tremendous infusion of people from the Iraq and Afghan wars. and the VA is simply stretched. I don't know if it's got the budget that it needs or the personnel that it needs, and I was sorry to see Secretary Shinseki go.
Yeah, he was there for 5 years. His service to his country is unparalleled, and no one should question that. But the management of the VA in the last 5 years has not been good. An 8% increase in veterans, 34% increase in funding. Someone has to be held accountable. Now, I didn't call for his resignation. I thought he should come to Congress and lay out a plan to fix it. That never really happened, and he becomes a distraction. This is as serious a problem as I have ever seen, and the culture is rotten to the core that it would allow double lists and veterans to actually die sitting on those lists. Something is rotten at the VA, and we need to get to the bottom of it. I would bring somebody from the outside to get a handle on this thing, and it should be quick, it should be severe. This notion that nobody gets fired in this town and everybody is a wonderful human being in the way they manage is just simply not the way the world works. If we want to get to the bottom of it, people, I think, need to be held accountable yesterday, and at the same time a plan of implementation to get it fixed.
General Jones, this must have, I think probably you knew General Shinseki and know him well. Do you think this was about politics, or do you think this was about his service at the VA?
Well, I think, frankly, Rick Shinseki, who I do know very well, he was Chief of Staff of the Army when I was Commandant of the Marine Corps. We've been associates for a long time. There was no finer soldier that I know. But what's happened at the VA is something that I know that he is deeply troubled by and was surprised by. And it really suggests a systemic problem of enormous proportions. And you know, we have a saying in the military that a leader is responsible for all that his unit does and fails to do. And no one has lived up to that more than Rick Shinseki. And that's why I think that probably today, in retrospect, he really feels that he should have known, and he regrets that he didn't. But I think there's a lot of problems in the chain of command that kept him from knowing what he should have known.
Got to change the chain of command, I think. General Jim Jones, Congressman Mike Rogers, former Ambassador Nick Burns, you have added immensely to our discussion today. I really appreciate your coming.
Thank you very much.
And when we return, President Obama says fixing a dysfunctional VA is not rocket science.